Welcome to Book Club with Jane Smiley. I'm Jay Ryan Straddle, author of Kitchens of the Great Midwest and the Lager Queen of Minnesota. Like Jane, I have a strong affection for the Midwest, and her Midwest settings are what first drew me to her work. It's my honor to host this event with her tonight. Before I introduce tonight's guest properly, allow me a moment to tell you a bit more about the unique series that is bringing her to us. Club Book is a program of MELSA, the Metropolitan Library Service Agency, made possible through Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, and coordinated by Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. Carver County Library is the co-organizer of this evening's talk. Thanks also to partnering bookseller Red Balloon Bookshop. Purchase links to Jane's latest release, Perestroika in Paris, as well as her impressive backlist, will be available in the comments section of this live stream feed. Have the book shipped, pick it up at the lovely store in St. Paul, or have Red Balloon deliver it personally to your door if you're in the area. One final housekeeping note. Also in the comments, you'll see a survey link. MELSA would greatly appreciate hearing what you think of this Club Book program. It's quick and easy. Now for our featured event. Pulitzer Prize winner Jane Smiley is, in the words of one recent reviewer, among America's most accomplished and wide-ranging writers. Her 30 books to date include 2 short story collections, 2 biographies, and 8 books geared towards young readers. Jane's influential and admired novels include the prize-winning 1,000 Acres, a modern retelling of King Lear. Smiley returned to the Heartland in her Last 100 Years trilogy, which follows the fortunes and travails of an Iowa farm family over several generations. Smiley's latest Perestroika in Paris offers fans something of a departure. In this instant bestseller, a spirited racehorse named Perestroika, nicknamed Paris, escapes her enclosure outside Paris and tries to make a new life for herself. In doing so, she befriends a street-smart dog named Frida, a pair of talkative ducks named Sid and Nancy, and a curious boy named Etienne. After a short reading by our guest and some initial questions from me, we'll have time for audience Q&A. Simply drop your questions in the comments thread here on Facebook, and our tech manager will route them to me. If you'd prefer to contribute a question a bit more anonymously, you can also send a private message to Club Book here on Facebook, or send an email to clubbookmn@gmail.com. Now, finally, let's welcome Jane Smiley. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jay Ryan. How are you?
I'm good. It's great to see you again. Great to have you here in Club Book.
Thank you.
Now, you've selected something to read for us.
I have. It's just the beginning. I like to read from the beginning because it's the setup. And maybe I could say this is such an oddball story that readers who haven't actually read it yet, they need the setup. So I'm going to read it, and I have to take my glasses off to do so.
Mm-hmm. I do too.
Okay. Paris had won her race. She had jumped all the jumps with a great deal of pleasure, and she thought in excellent form. The number 2 horse, a chestnut gelding from down south somewhere, had been so far behind her that she hadn't been able to hear his hoofbeats on the turf. And of course, the crowd was yelling too. She had, she thought, almost danced across the finish line. Everyone was happy. The jockey did a backflip off her. The groom gave her a kiss, and Delphine, her trainer, gave her a hug, and 3 lumps of brown sugar, not to mention an excellent feed of carrots when she was all cool and calm after the race. Since it was the last race of the day, and indeed the year, it was early November, the van, which already had its 4 horses, had left before her race began, so as to come back and get her. But now the van was late. The stable was empty, and Rania, her groom, had, she said, gone to the bathroom. And why not in the stall, thought Paris, but she could never get an answer to that question. Twilight was descending over the vast green expanse of Auteuil racecourse. The jumps had dimmed into dark shapes against the still vivid green grass. Admiring this, Paris did something that she often did. She pressed against the door of the stall, and this time something happened that had never happened before. It swung open. After a moment, Paris stepped carefully out onto the fine, crunchy gravel and snorted. Everything remained quiet. She could see now that every stall was empty and dark. In fact, the green of the racecourse was the brightest color around, so bright that for a moment she didn't dare head out there. But Paris was a very curious filly. At her feet were several items that Rania had left behind: the grooming box full of brushes, Paris's blue blanket, and something that Paris knew was called a purse. This was the only thing that interested Paris. She had seen lots of purses and heard even more about them. She had, in fact, just won a purse, and so she thought this would certainly be it. She dropped her nose, snuffled a bit, and found the handle. She picked it up and trotted out of the stable yard onto the racecourse. Really, she thought, for a horse who had just run a long race and with 14 jumps, she felt quite full of beans. She kicked up her heels and gave a squeal. To begin with, Paris had no idea of making a getaway. Not only did she like racing in Delphine and Rania and her owner, Madeline, and several of the other horses, as well as her nice clean stall up here in Maison Lafitte, she really didn't know much else. None of the horses did. All had been born on pleasant farms in the country, and all had come to Maison Lafitte when they were hardly more than babies, and all had been galloping and eating and riding in the van and racing and galloping and eating and racing for quite a while, as long as Paris could clearly remember, actually. It was an active life, and in Maison Lafitte there was plenty to see of a morning, especially if you raced over jumps. But the horses did talk among themselves about what else might be out there. Some worldly ones who had traveled from down south or from across the sea had seen different courses. They lorded it over the others a bit. There were also those who talked about escaping this life, but they never talked about what else they might do. Paris did not think that any of them were as curious as she was. And here was the grass, turf, they called it, but grass, really, as thick and green and appetizing as it could possibly be. And a racehorse never got to eat a strand of it, never even thought of doing such a thing. A race course was for racing. Paris took a few bites. And so I'll stop there.
Oh, that's so lovely. I deeply admire the depth and the love in these characters. And I know you have a dog named Frida, and you have extensive.
Oh, we did.
Yeah.
Frida,
oh, you did. Oh.
Yeah, she was, I think she was 15, maybe 16 when she died, but she was the inspiration for the dog Frida.
Oh, wonderful.
She was a German short hair. And even though, and we adopted her when she was about a year and a half old, I guess. Mm-hmm. And even though she had lots of fun, she always looked sad and sort of gloomy when she was laying in her chair. So that was an interesting aspect. I always called her a German existentialist, you know.
That's hilarious. Well, that said, was Frida the first character that came to you? How did this menagerie of unlikely friends assemble?
No, the first character that came to me was my horse, Paris, whose name was Perestroika, and whose nickname is Paris. And what the reason was that I went I'd had her, let's see, this was about 2008, and she was about 3 years old, which is about the same age as a race horse. And she'd been to the racetrack, but she hadn't enjoyed it, I don't think.
Okay.
And anyway, I was in Paris, and I was visiting a woman there, actually from Wisconsin, who is a very successful racehorse trainer in France. Interesting. And I keep waiting for her to write her own book. Her name is Gina Rarick. Anyway, I visited her, and then I came in and I went to this restaurant in a place I hadn't been before, which is on the west side of the Seine, up a steep hill, called the Place de Trocadero. And we had an incredibly delicious bowl of French onion soup. And I said to my husband, you know, what would be really funny would be if a horse escaped the racetrack and came here. Then I looked around and I said, oh, that's totally ridiculous. But when we walked around that side of Paris, which would be the Place de Trocadero, some of the nearby streets, the river, and then the Champ de Mars and the Eiffel Tower. I remember this was in 2008, before they made a lot of changes to the area around the Eiffel Tower. I thought it was really a fascinating area. And so I thought, well, you know, it's totally unlikely, but it's remotely possible, and why not? And so that's what was the inspiration for the book.
I love it. And one of the many things I love about this book, and then other readers do as well, that I've seen in other interviews with you, is that there's no villain. Even the local gendarme is kind of charming.
Yeah, he
is. I loved him. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, and at a certain point, I realized, no, he's just kind of a sweet guy. I'd love to hear more.
You know, people have brought this up, and what I say is, life for these characters, life is the villain. And life itself is the thing that has presented the challenges, and they've had to overcome plenty of challenges, especially the old lady who's one of the main characters, but also her great grandson, who's quite young. So I didn't want to put in some bad guy and then distract the readers from just the idea of making it day by day in a world where you don't know what's next. So that was my goal.
Excellent. Real quick aside here, someone in the audience wants to mention that she's named her puppy Frida after reading this book.
Well, let's have a talk about Frida. I was at a horse show, and a young woman walked by with Frida, and she's the most beautiful dog I ever saw. And I jumped up and I said, oh, what a beautiful dog. And she said, well, the owner wants to put her up for adoption. I said, I'll take her. And it turned out that she had done some damage around the house when the owner was outside or away or something like that. But I had Great Danes. Great Danes ripped the backs off of couches and take all the stuffing out of their arms, and they steal things from shelves. And so I thought I could handle that. And she never did anything bad in our house. So
awesome.
She was a really good dog.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. In the LA Times interview, they call this novel wholly apolitical, and added, in an era beset by polarization and even violent tribalism, it feels like a gift to find a novel in which characters of different species with different desires and instincts come together to build a community. So, yeah, please tell us more about what inspired this.
Well, the first characters that came to me were the animal characters. So there was Frida, and there was Paris, and then, you know, obviously I had to do a lot of research. So I had to go back and forth to Paris a lot and walk. Oh, poor me, right?
Yeah, burdensome research indeed. Yeah.
Eat a lot of macaroons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And when I was in the Champ de Mars, I noticed the ravens, the bands of ravens. And then there used to be, I don't know if it's still there, but there used to be a little pond or a little pair of ponds not far from the Eiffel Tower, and I noticed mallards in there. So I thought that would be fun. The mallards are quite beautiful ducks, and I thought that'd be fun to put them in there. I walked down the streets, looked at the houses. The houses were quite old, maybe 100 or more years old, very substantial. And I figured there would be rats in the walls. Why not? So I decided to introduce the 2 rat characters. So there's the dog, the horse, the mallards, the raven, and the 2 rats. And then the human characters were more for practical reasons. I said to myself, okay, where would the dog, not Paris, because she only is out and about at night, but where would the dog go, and who would the dog see and encounter, and how maybe would those relationships grow? So the characters sort of came in. Now, Etienne, the boy, he's kind of like me as a boy, because when I was little, I was totally obsessed with horses. So my true dream would have been to go out to a park or to our lawn or to somewhere and have a horse show up. And so, here's my fantasy self.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, you had the genesis for this novel while you were in Paris, thinking about what an unlikely scenario this was. So you never considered another setting. I was just curious what factors were important to you when you decided to set it in Paris, and in this section of Paris particularly.
Well, this section is not quite as urban because of the Champ de Mars, but also because of some other places too. It's not quite as urban as central Paris. And she'd be more likely to escape notice there in this section.
Okay.
It's also a very beautiful section because of the terrain. And it's also there's a forest. The Bois de Boulogne is on the far side of this section. And so there's a way that she could conceivably get into town from Auteuil racecourse through the Bois de Boulogne. And I didn't see, there's no other part of town that I could see this was even possible.
I see.
So there were practical reasons, but also it's just, I think it's a fascinating area. And there is a very interesting graveyard up the hill from the Place de Trocadero. And that's where Frida's owner often sleeps. So
right.
Did
Jacques.
sleep before he died. He's already died before the book starts.
Yeah, Jacques Soul. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Jacques
Cool, yeah, cool stage name. Yeah, we never learn his real name, I don't think, but
I don't think Frida knew that either.
Yeah, right. Many of the other books of yours I've read largely take place in the Midwest, particularly Iowa, where you spent 24 years. And so what attracted and attracts you to Iowa as a setting? And do you know yet if any future novels may take place there?
Well, I moved to Iowa because my first husband got accepted to the history department at the university. So when we moved to Iowa, we didn't live in Iowa City. We rented a house on a farm that had been sold, and the house was going to be a tear down, but it hadn't been torn down yet. It was outside of, just on the far side of Wellman. And it was a nice house and we liked it. But going back and forth from Iowa City to Wellman was really fascinating for me. And then at the same time that we were living there, I happened to read a book by Barry Commoner called The Closing Circle about pesticides and the natural world. Now, the other great thing about that particular spot was that if you walked to the left, kind of down the road, there was a wetland preserve. that was very beautiful. So here I was, I could go into Iowa City, which was cosmopolitan and enjoyable. I could come back to Wellman through farm country, and through Kelowna, which was fascinating because of the Amish population.
Yeah.
And then I could walk down the road into a wetland that was very natural. And so that made me think about Iowa and farming. And then when I finished my degree at the University of Iowa, the place that hired me to teach was Iowa State. And so when I moved to Ames, I saw that Ames was in many ways completely different from, it was another part of Iowa. And so I understood living in Iowa that Iowa is as individual and idiosyncratic as any other state, that what other people thought about it was just wrong. And it was really worth investigating sort of the natural world and the economic world and the social world of Iowa. I loved teaching at Iowa State. I loved Ames. I thought it was the best place in the world to have children. And actually, given who I'm talking to, one of the great things about Ames was zip, you could go straight north and there you were in Minneapolis, and there you were, it wasn't Paris, but it was almost.
Yeah. Yeah, I was blessed to have grown up about 45 minutes away from Minneapolis in Hastings, Minnesota. And that was my city growing up, and was very fortunate to have that be my city. Yeah.
We actually almost moved there, but the year that we thought about moving there was the year when the snow started pouring down before Halloween. And what year was that? 86 or 87, something like that.
87 or 88. Yeah. It was right around there, because I remember we had just moved to a new neighborhood where I don't think we'd trick or treated yet. And yeah, we didn't get the chance to.
Yeah, and we thought it was way too scary to live in that much snow. So we did not move to Minneapolis, but we were tempted.
Yeah, it's still there. Yeah. I think about it myself too sometimes. I'm tempted every time I go back. So your career as an author is quite prolific. 30 books. What good habits can you credit for your steady writing and publication pace?
Well, I have to say probably curiosity. I get interested in things, and Perestroika in Paris is a good example of that. I get interested in things, and I look around and I think, oh, that might be a good idea. And then I start doing the research. So perfect example of that actually is 1,000 Acres. And guess where we were driving from? We were driving back from Minneapolis. And it was late in the day. It was dusk, and we were coming down 35. And I was looking around, and I'd been sort of planning to do the King Lear book for a long time. And I was looking around in that northern section that's very flat. And I thought, this would be an interesting spot to set that Lear book. And then I looked up that area. And it was really interesting because of the marshy landscape and the drilled wells that drain the water into the groundwater. And also because of the unbelievable fertility of that section. And I thought, this is really an interesting place to set that Lear book. And the more I looked it up, the more interesting it got. And so quite often I am inspired by place. sometimes by oddball characters, but most of the time by place and how interesting different places are. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, one last question from me, and then we'll open it up to the audience. I've read that Frank Marshall and Barry Sonnenfeld are tackling Perestroika in Paris as an animated feature. Do you have any updates on
They're
that?
still at it. You
Okay,
never
good.
know with Hollywood. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen after you're dead.
Right.
You just hope for the best, but they're very enthusiastic.
That's wonderful to
And
hear.
so that's all I care about. They're very experienced. They're very enthusiastic. And let's just hope it happens.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think it'd be wonderful to see. Well, we have no shortage of questions from the audience tonight,
Good.
so I'll turn it over to them. I'll begin with this one that was sent in advance. What read-alike suggestions might you have for a YA reader who has already read the Horses of Oak Valley Ranch series twice?
Well, that's really sweet. Has she also read the 3 sequels to the Horses of Oak Valley Ranch?
Oh,
Because there's a character in the Horses of Oak Valley Ranch who's a student of Abby, the main character of those books. And I was very fond of her. Her name is Ellen, and she is contrary. And I thought I would write about, and they're actually for slightly younger readers, but I think they're fun and I quite enjoy them. The first one is called Riding Lessons.
oh, excellent.
And it's about this contrary girl who loves horses and who also believes that the horses and is contrary and has her own ideas of what's right and what's wrong. But she also believes that the horses are talking to her. That was a fun thing. Abby's very practical, but Ellen believes the horses are talking to her, and that was a fun thing to explore.
Oh. Next question is, did you get any pushback from your editorial team on having no villain? It's charming, but needless to say, not the norm.
No, the editorial
good.
team were fine with it. I had been working on it for such a long time that by the time that I suggested that I guess it was 2015. No, goodness gracious, not much more recently than that. It was 2019 when I suggested that maybe they should look at it and publish it. And I said, maybe you should publish it around after the election, and because it might be a relief from whatever will be going on around the election. And they were happy to have no villain for this book. It's also a little bit, I hope and I wish that it'll appeal to young readers and adult readers. And, for young readers, I don't think there has to be a villain. So.
Yeah, as you put it so well earlier, life is villain enough, particularly when you're young and you feel like so much is stacked against you. Yeah. I don't typically have villains in my books either, and I don't really. No, I don't really see a need for it. I mean, quite often in my characters' lives, their economic status is enough of an antagonist.
And my characters feel the same way. Question is, are we going to get anything to eat?
Yeah, right.
And I mean, Etienne, he has to take care of his great grandmother, not his great.
Yes.
But he has to take care of her, and it might be just a little more than he can handle. So that, in some sense, is part of his dilemma.
Right. And your characters in Some Luck, for example, they're too busy. Like if they had a villain, like they wouldn't have time for them. They're just getting through each day. Yeah. No, that's one of the reasons I love that book. Yeah. Let's see. Next question. You picture Paris' story as a one-off kind of narrative experiment, or might we see more stories in this style from you?
Well, I have thought about a sequel.
Mm.
And the reason I thought about that is because the horse that I'm riding is really an interesting gelding. He's a really interesting guy. And I can imagine he and Paris having serious serious discussions about philosophical issues,
Mm.
with her rolling her eyes and saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous." But he's a beauty, and so I thought maybe in the sequel, Etienne and Paris would be, maybe 8 years older,
Mm.
and they would move to another part of France that is more rural and maybe a little more mysterious, and maybe there would be a.
Excellent. Yeah. It's kind this kind of question I hear sometimes myself, and I suppose it was inevitable after bringing up the film adaptation. But do you have any sort of dream voice talent casting for the feature?
My dream voice talent is Gabriel Byrne, and that comes
Oh,
from me listening to him read his own books.
wow.
And he does all of the accents in his books so well.
Wow.
Even though his books are nonfiction and they're reminiscences,
Mhm.
he's lived in a lot of different places. And so he would be my dream voice talent for the animation, but I'm not sure he would take it, but it would be fun to have him. But there's plenty of guys and women who could do the voices. And so it's entirely up to Mr. Sonnenfeld and Frank Marshall.
This question's from a reader who says she first encountered you with Thousand Acres. She's always wanted to ask a Pulitzer Prize winner, what was it like to win that major award? How were you informed, and what is involved for the recipient?
Well, that's actually quite a funny story, and I'm glad she asked it. So it was 1992, and I was pregnant with my son, and I was in the kitchen with my daughter, my older daughter, who was then 14. And I had been on the phone with an editor from the New York Times because I was doing a book review for her. And so then the phone rang again, and I picked that up. And it was somebody from the Des Moines Register.
Hmm.
And they said, "What have you heard lately?" I said, "I don't know." They said, "Well, okay, have you heard anything about the Pulitzer Prize?" I said, "Nope." And so then they said, "Okay. If it turned out that you had won the Pulitzer Prize, what would you say?" So I said something, I don't even remember what it was. And then I turned to my daughter and I said, "Honey, I think I won the Pulitzer Prize." And, being 14, she looked at me and said, "Huh."
Oh, I love it.
Who cares?
Yeah,
So
right. What does
then
this
I
have to do
went.
with me?
Then I went over to the campus, and I was waiting for my class to start. And I was sitting in my office, and 2 o'clock was the time when all the news went out on the wires back in those days.
Mhm.
And at exactly 2 o'clock, the phone started ringing, and all these people from small Iowa newspapers, fancy newspapers, all kinds of people were asking me what I thought. And then I heard someone running down the hallway, and I opened the door and I saw the person suddenly stop. She was carrying the Ames Tribune. Oh, right. She was the stringer for the Des Moines Register. And the guy who called me was from the Ames Tribune. And she was carrying the Ames Tribune, and she'd opened it up, and she said, "Oh shit." And it turned out that the Des Moines Register had been scooped by the Ames Tribune.
Yeah, I love it.
So I didn't do anything much because I was pregnant. I didn't want to go on the road, but so I just got some flowers and some boxes of chocolates and some congratulations, and that was plenty for me. That was fine.
Awesome. Yeah. Next question is, how long does it usually take you to write a manuscript?
It really varies from book to book. Some have taken longer than others, and a lot of it depends on how much research I have to do and what's available. So when I was writing the trilogy, the last 100 Years trilogy, I started writing each episode or each book at the beginning of January, and then I would get to the end sometime in June, and then I would set it aside and come back to it in the fall. So, and guess where I was going in the summer? Well, I was going up to Lac du Flambeau, Wisconsin, where we had a lovely summer house. And so, so those books took me about 5.5, 6 months, a little more per volume. Other books have been quicker. Other books have been taken much longer. It just depends on what I know and what I don't know about what's going on and how well I understand the characters and the setting and the plot. I will say that when I was writing 1,000 Acres, the task that I set myself was to adhere as closely as was realistically possible to King Lear.
Mm.
And there was a moment, I think toward the end of Act 3, maybe the beginning of Act 4, where I realized that I'd gone off track and I had to sort it out and figure out a way to get back to my original goal. So it depends on how well I stick with it and, what my goal is and what's easy and what's not easy. Characters are usually relatively easy. But when I was writing Private Life and the main male character was what I would call a crackpot, he was very difficult to understand. And I had a hard time with him. But characters in general are kind of easier than other parts. I love writing about setting. That's probably my favorite thing to write about. And it just varies from book to book.
One audience member writes, "Good faith is one of my favorites of your work, and your knowledge of the real estate business blows this reader away. What research did you do to prepare for that?"
I talked to my husband.
Oh.
Because before he came to California, he was a realtor in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. And one of the reasons I wrote that book was because he had some issues with his career back there. And I said, okay, let's write a book about it. It's interesting and it's also pertinent. And so he was the one who sort of taught me how to think about it and how to know what to do with regard to the real estate world, especially in the 80s, which is when the book takes place. He's not a realtor in California anymore.
Okay. Another question that the writer phrases as a deep thinking question. Because you have such a long string of books over so many decades, did you ever think of your stories as an autobiography of your journey as an author? And would you have approached any older projects differently if you had tackled them today?
No,
Yeah.
they just came along one at a time. I took them on because they interested me. I'm not one of those people who's going to go back and rewrite their work. I think I think William Butler Yeats went back and rewrote some of his poetry. Um, I'd rather just keep going and trying new stuff and doing stuff, and not try to second guess myself or my former self.
hmm Someone in one audience member's book club told her that Jane's husband reads all of her drafts and offers other input as well. If that's the case, what can you share about this working relationship?
Well, he doesn't read them. I read them to him.
Even better.
Yeah. So when I write something during the day, then the next morning, before I start the next episode or the next bit that I'm writing, I read it aloud to him. And then the good thing for me is that I can see the mistakes that I made, like the grammar mistakes or the spelling mistakes, and correct those. But I also can sense whether he understands it, whether it makes sense to him. And quite often he'll have a suggestion or two.
Mm,
And I found that once I started doing that, reading aloud to him, that it was easier to make the rough draft come together. So I think the benefit for me is there's two. One is having him hear it and respond, and one is having myself read it aloud. And when I was teaching creative writing, I begged my students to read their stories aloud to themselves before they turned them in, because then they would catch the grammatical errors and the spelling errors. And I think that's really important.
yeah. I do the same thing. I read everything I write to Brooke at night after the day's done,
Uh-huh.
and I agree. There's no replacement for it.
Mhm.
It's improved my work as much as anything. Yeah, both for the same two reasons you stated, both in terms of me catching mistakes, but also her input. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, one of my favorite authors is Anthony Trollope.
Hmm.
And he had his wife read his books and correct them.
Hmm.
And so she offered critiques and she offered suggestions. And I think one of the things that happened in Trollope's oeuvre, and which is enormous and way bigger than mine will ever be, was that he became more and more interested in women characters and women's issues as he kept going. And
Hmm.
I'm sure that that was part of his wife's influence on his work.
Wow.
And so, from my point of view, I think he's one of the most insightful 19th century authors about women, the complexity of women's natures, the complexity of their situations, and how to get them to change or learn or whatever. And I think that was because his wife helped him.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. I didn't know that. Yeah. Next question from a reader is, were you living in Iceland when you wrote the Greenlanders? And what was the
No, but
origin
I
story?
had.
Oh,
I
you had.
had lived
Okay.
in Iceland. I was living in Ames.
And what was, yeah, and the follow-up
And
to
in
that
order
was,
to do my research into how terribly cold it was in Greenland, I went to Minneapolis.
yeah, you got it. You got it.
No, I spent time in Iceland in graduate school, starting in 76 and ending in 77 during the school year. And when I was there, and I loved the Icelandic sagas and I enjoyed Iceland quite a bit. And when I was there, I got really interested in the sagas that talked about Greenland. And I knew that I wanted to write a book that would be similar to a saga. Now the sagas, the Greenland sagas in the medieval Greenland sagas are about the founding of the Greenland colony. Obviously, they're not about how it ended, but I was fascinated by how it ended. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna try to write my own saga about the end of the Greenland colony. But I knew I needed practice. And so I decided I was going to wait for, 10 years and try other books and do and get a little experience before I did something that I had no idea of what I was going to do. So I started it in the early 80s. In the summer of 84, I did go to Greenland for about 2 weeks and look around. It was really interesting. And then I went to Denmark, and there was a great museum of archaeological finds from Greenland. And a lot of them were very well preserved because of the boggy soil and the freezing weather. So that was fascinating too. And then it turned out that a guy that I had met after graduate school, when I worked on an archaeological dig in Winchester, England, he became a Greenland archaeologist. And so I sent the manuscript to him, and he read it, and he said that it was accurate as far as he could say. So it was one that I sort of could not do. I had to do it. It fascinated me, and I loved the sagas when I was reading them, so I had to do it.
Next question is, do you have any say in the cover art used in your books? This reader thinks Perestroika in Paris is really cute and loves the font titles in the Last 100 Years trilogy as well.
Well, they show it to you. And if you really hate it, they think about,
Yeah.
But I quite like this one, apart from the fact that and this is not true of the paperback edition, which is basically the same cover, but in the hardback edition, this particular horse is a male.
Oh yeah, you're right.
So it's my fault I didn't notice that when they first showed me the cover. But some of the covers I really loved, and I've really been grateful for the artists who do their best to do the cover art.
Does the paperback edition also include the lovely map?
I believe so. I haven't gotten my copies of it, so I haven't opened it up yet, but I bet it does, because most people need it.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, great question. Trollop and Sagas. Wouldn't have expected either. So great. What contemporary authors have you been eating up lately?
Well, I found this one. This is one of my favorite authors, and I found it under a stack of books. And I said, shit, why didn't I read this one before? This is Man of Parts by David Lodge.
Oh.
And it's a fictional rendering of H.G. Wells' later life. It's totally fascinating. I read, let's see, I'm also reading Dawson's Fall by Roxanna Robinson. Roxanna and I are doing a little Facebook group where she reads Some Luck and I read Dawson's Fall.
Oh, I love it.
And I really liked The Overstory by Richard Powers. I thought that was really good. And then I also listened to audiobooks. And so the audiobook I've been listening to is Ashes and Elm, or I think it's Ashes and Elm. And it's a sort of new revised history of the Vikings. And that's good. And unlike a lot of historians, the guy who wrote it has a very good sense of humor. So every so often you're reading about all these horrifying things, and then he makes a little joke, and it's sort of funny.
Oh, that's wonderful. Uh, this reader asks, I just finished A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, and I wonder if you have all your books planned out or whether the plot or characters take on a life of their own and direct you.
That varies from book to book. Mostly I let them go their own way. That was especially true in the trilogy, but I wanted to just see what they were like when they were born, and then see what they did once they were on their feet and running around. And that was quite interesting to me. I came to feel like I was, with all the characters in the trilogy, I came to feel like I was sitting in a train car eavesdropping on a whole bunch of people from the same family. And so it came to feel like I wasn't writing them, they were speaking for themselves. And that was really fun. I like that.
Yeah, I do too. That's when I feel like I'm at my best, is when they're dictating
Mhm.
or when I'm taking dictation from them. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree.
One reader wants to know, what books or kinds of books did you read to get through the pandemic? Did you read it? Did
Oh,
your reading habits change?
no, my reading habits didn't change.
Mine didn't either.
I
Yeah.
mean, I'm always reading something.
Yeah.
And I read several books at the same time, and I go kind of slow, and I'll sprinkle in maybe a PG Woodhouse for some comic relief, or I'll sprinkle in a trollop just because I love his work, or
Hmm.
I'll read something that I've read before to see if it feels different. But no, my reading habits didn't change.
You get inundated with requests from authors and publicists to read and blurb books. That's
Pretty
what someone
much,
wants to
but
know.
that I don't do it, so it
Okay.
stopped.
Yeah. 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 That's
Sometimes,
a good way to.
I got a blurb request for a teen horse book that I thought was funny, and
Mm,
I blurbed that one.
mm,
I got a blurb request from Frank Schaefer, who I think is a really interesting guy. Um, and I blurbed his book, but in general, I don't blurb fiction. And it's conceivable that I'll blurb nonfiction, but there's a lot of stuff in nonfiction that I don't know enough to know whether it's any good or not. I'm more interested in what I have to learn from nonfiction rather than what I think about it.
okay. One reader wants to know, do you or have you dealt with horses professionally?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I have horses, and I've showed horses, and I've taken a lot of lessons, and I've supported horses, and I've owned a couple of race horses, but I always have trainers who help me. So no, I haven't dealt with horses professionally.
Let's see. Do you get feedback from members of the farming community on the realism of your work?
Well, when I was touring for Some Luck and the other books, yes, I got feedback then, and it was generally positive. I didn't.
Okay.
Nobody said this is a crackpot, stupid. It was generally positive. I tried to be as realistic and honest and accurate as I can. And if someone doesn't like something, then I might change it, or we might just talk about it and talk about what the difference is. But no, I haven't had a problem with that.
Yeah. One reader wants to know if you have any famous fans who've told you or who you've learned through the grapevine are fans of your work.
I don't know.
Yeah. Barry Sonnenfeld, apparently. Yeah. All right. We're at the 5-minute mark here. So I think that's just about it. I've got a few closing remarks to make here. If there's any last question, I might be able to fit it in. But in the meantime, I'll start wrapping it up. Jane, wow, thank you. This has been fantastic. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again.
Oh,
It's been
thanks.
a
That's
few
great to
years.
see you. It has
Yeah,
been.
thanks. Yeah, it's been a few years since I last saw you in South Dakota, and I hope we both get to do that event again sometime.
That would be fun. That would be
Yeah,
fun.
yeah. Um, okay. Oh, yeah. One last question, and this is de rigueur, it seems. What's next from you, Jane? Can you share anything about what you're working on?
Yeah, I have a book coming out in about a year. It's a murder mystery. It's set in Monterey, California, near where I live, in the 1850s.
Mm,
And that was quite an interesting time in Monterey history because for 1 year, Monterey was the capital of California.
wow.
And then then the gold rush sort of came in and all the important stuff moved north. But Monterey is a really interesting town. It has, they've done a wonderful job of keeping the buildings and in good shape, the ones that were around in the 1850s. And so it's fascinating to walk around and to imagine. And it also has a very beautiful natural landscape. So it's fascinating. It was fascinating to imagine what a murder mystery like that might have been.
Mm, fantastic. What kind of resources did you take advantage of to find out more about Monterey of that time?
Oh, there's a Monterey Historical Society, and there's a lot of historical buildings, and so there were plenty of resources. That was not
Oh,
a problem at all.
excellent. Oh, it looks like we do have one more question sneak in here. Do you have a favorite writing spot or nook or any writing rituals?
Well, I think here I am, the modern version of Marcel Proust. I sit up in my bed and I write on my computer.
Mm, nice. All right. Well, I believe that's all we have time for this evening. Thank you again, Jane, for making
Well,
time for
thank
us
you,
tonight.
Jay Ryan. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. This has been a virtual presentation of
Stay
Club
warm.
Book. I'm sorry, Jane?
I said, stay warm.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Um, this has been a virtual presentation of Club Book, a long-running literary series from ELSA made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Special thanks again to Carver County Library for the part they played bringing Jane to us. Before you log off, look for the Club Book survey link, which is in the comments and will be projected in place of my video momentarily. As it happens, tonight's program is the last in the series fall lineup, but don't worry, Club Book will be back again in the spring. Sign up for the e-newsletter, like them on Facebook, or be among the first to learn which best-selling and award-winning authors are coming to Twin Cities libraries in March and April. With that, I'll sign out. Have a great night, everyone.